Welcome to Top Class with me, Duncan Crawford, where we're talking about education in Afghanistan under the Taliban. My guest today is a woman who risked everything to get an education. Sola Mahfouz was 11 years old when men came to her home in southern Afghanistan and threatened to throw acid in her face if she continued to go to school. After years of being denied an education, at the age of 16, she began to teach herself in secret using online courses. She later travelled to Pakistan to take an SAT test to attend a college in the US. She passed, managed to get a visa, and is now 27 and researching quantum computing at Tufts University in the greater Boston area. She's also co-author of her memoir, Defiant Dreams, the journey of an Afghan girl who risked everything for an education. Sola Mahfouz, thank you so much for joining me. Talk us through your life as a young girl in Afghanistan, because you were born a few years after the Taliban were cementing their control. Is that right?
Yes. So Taliban came to Kandahar, my hometown, in 1995. But then when they took over the whole country was 1996. That's when I was born. And of course, at that time, until 2001, I was shielded by the innocence of my childhood. So there are some moments that I remember from that time, but mostly it's through the stories that my sister, my mother, or like the readings that I have done is that I learn about those dark times.
And in that time, TV was banned, music was banned. You describe in your book how your mum started having to wear a burqa.
Yes. My mother grew up in Afghanistan at the time of the 1960s where it was modernizing. And so she got educated. And then eventually she was a professor at Kabul University. And then the civil war started and all of her, dreams shattered in her life. And so then after the civil war, the Taliban came. And then it's basically women were in prison at home. They have nothing. Whenever they had to go out, they had to be accompanied by a man or, even their younger sons, and they had to wear this burqa. And so for my mother, that was her first time. And, my brother, he had seen her being a lecturer, just this independent woman. And suddenly she was wearing this thing and he had to accompany her. So he just thought she's blind, and he would tell her, okay, don't step here, you will fall. So I think this is basically kind of symbolizes what women lost over those years.
And you were about 5 years old, is that right, when the US invaded in 2001 and removed the Taliban from power?
Yes.
Right. So after the US took control, what changed? Were you going to school?
Yeah, so school reopened, and the first days we were so happy. My mother was so happy because, my siblings that, after the civil war and the Taliban time, my older siblings were not able to go to school. And then me, my sister, and my other brothers, my mom was so happy, like at least this generation of her kids are not gonna be uneducated. There was so much happiness, but when I was fifth grade, that stopped too.
And you are obviously passionate about education and getting yourself educated. And your parents, they were particularly supportive of helping you get an education.
Exactly, because as I said, my mom was educated. And I think once you're educated, you kind of you see the world in a different way. And then you see your kids are not able to see that way. And it just pains you so much. So for them, that was a big thing. And they instilled in us, education was learning was such a sacred thing, especially in my mom's side of the family, where my grandfather put so much emphasis on girls' education, especially.
So you're coming from this family where you've got a very supportive mother and grandfather. But let's jump forward a few years to when you were 11 years old. Your family received threats about you and your sisters. What happened?
This was at the time the Taliban were making a comeback. There was suicide bombing exploding, and also they start threatening girls who were going to school. There were incidents of girls, acids were thrown on their face. And so this was the time, it's around 2006 and 2007, and that's when we stopped going to school. And actually, I didn't understand at that time what that meant, and I was happy that I was not going to school, because the school that I was going to was not very intellectually enriching environment. But of course, for the older people who understand the gravity of the situation, that was different. And for me, only years after, I began to understand what that meant.
Did other girls, friends of yours, people you know, also receive similar threats?
Initially when the school reopened, there's a lot of girls started to go. But then 2005, one of my friend that I know, she was just being followed and then she stopped going to school. And so we were the last girls that we stopped going to school. So slowly girls stopped going to school because of those kind of threats.
So for you and those girls you knew, at that point, what were you thinking about the future? What did you feel the future held for you?
I didn't really think much because I would spend my day and watching TV and then eventually you're going to get married. That was the path. It wasn't to think about future, you have to feel oh, I can do something about it. So there wasn't much to think about.
So what changed then?
So I saw my brothers, they were going to very good school and they were thriving intellectually. They would talk about things, and I felt really attracted to those kind of topics. They would talk about math, and they were how hard it is. Or my brother was trying to go to England, and he was learning English. I felt there was purpose in their life, while mine, revolved around what everyone was doing in the family. Are there guests coming? So I have to prepare. Or is there a wedding that I can prepare my clothes for? So. And it wasn't leading to something more. I felt what's the purpose of all that? What is, it's every day it's the same. And I felt really jealous of my brother's life. And that's when it initially started that was there's something wrong the way I'm living.
So it was jealousy of your brothers, which actually propelled you forward to try and get an education.
Yeah, exactly. Because for example, my older brother, he had this, everyone was respected, my father, my uncle, they would listen to his opinions, because while mine, I was just in the shadow, who cares, what I say, what I think, but not just because I didn't really have anything to say. And then I would also see women around me, even though my mom was educated, but everyone else, all the women other that I knew, they were not educated. And while men would talk about politics, about the world, and the women would just talk about gossip, fashion. At that time, it felt to me there was insignificant. And so I kind of wanted to be in that other world. And that's when I saw oh, I have to be educated to be in that other world.
So at that point, you are now age 16 and you start to try to get hold of educational materials. In your book, you talk about watching CNN and the BBC, watching YouTube videos, borrowing English books from your brother. How much effort did you put into educating yourself, studying alone?
So the idea of self-education really started for me was because my grandfather, my mom's father, he educated himself at the time, and he didn't have internet or English material or anything, but he had his own motivation, and he had put this huge emphasis, if you know English, it's opening a window to the world. And at that time I had so many questions. So initially I didn't start with education. I started with fashion and then religion. And then eventually I went to education. And my grandfather also said, just don't make an excuse. If you learn one word a day, it's 365 words a year. It's better than nothing. So I think it's that kind of motivation that made me start okay, if my grandfather could do it at that time, I can definitely do it now. And so I would start with BBC, watching for hours and hours BBC without understanding a word. I would understand a word or two, and CNN, and then whatever that I could find in my brother's room that were in English, and I would translate the words to Pashto, or the dictionary that I had where the words are very limited, and so that I would go back to an English dictionary. And that, there was one time I actually counted, and there were 50 words from just one word. So it just I felt it was this darkness, and there was this flashes of light here and there.
So you obviously had discovered this determination to learn, but the turning point, or one of the turning points, was the discovery of these online courses.
Yeah, so in 2012, I had some grasp of English that I could read in it. but I didn't have a lot of good English materials in Kandahar. And so my brother was going to Pakistan, and I asked him, like, yeah, just bring me anything that's in English. And so he brought me a lot of other books, and there was one magazine, Time magazine. And there I learned about Khan Academy because Sal Khan was featured in it. And then I opened my computer, and I saw like the beauty of algebra. And I knew from the talk of my brother and cousins of how hard algebra was. At that time, I also forgot my addition and subtraction. So I actually had to go back to learn that. And so this is how my educational journey with math and science started. I was 16, and I felt like really, really obsessed with math because it was such a structured, and it's just like I have to learn one thing to be able to learn another thing. And so I felt all my life, like the days, as I said, like everything else was not in my control, but this was in my control. And so I became really, really obsessed, like 8 hours a day, whatever time I could find, like I would.
8 hours a day?
Yeah.
All week? Every day?
Every day. Like, I would, like, for example, Friday is a holiday there. Like my brothers who were going to school would be out not studying, but I would be like studying because I was like, I would feel ashamed that he's younger than me, then he knows all of those things, and I'm older than him. I don't know anything.
So while you were studying in your room, during this period of Afghanistan's history, the Taliban had regrouped and regained control of large areas of the countryside. NATO formally ended its combat mission to Afghanistan in 2014, handing over to Afghan forces supported by US troops. I think by now you were probably around 18 or 19 at the time, but there's this growing insurgency. So while you're studying inside, what was life like outside?
I think at that time in Kandahar, there was a lot of targeted killing. They were targeting a lot of like people who work for the government. While in Kabul, there were like almost every day there was suicide bombing happening. And so I was very, very scared that, what if the Taliban come back? I will never be able to leave the country, because by that time, once I started like more math and science and philosophy and physics, I really wanted to go out and study in a university. And I knew that like there were times that I would dream, like I would look outside from my rooftop, and then in my dreams there would be the Taliban car. I would see them. And so then I would put even more pressure on myself. Like, I have to get somehow, like I have to get myself out of here before it's too late. So I think that fear was there, and this uncertainty. And I think at the time, Obama also announced that the US troops are going to pull out. Like those who lived in Afghanistan, we knew that the government is not able to sustain itself without the support of US troops. So we knew that the Taliban are going to come back.
So you developed this clear aspiration to leave the country. At what point did you think, I'm now at a level where I can compare myself to those who have had a full-time education?
I began to prepare myself for this exam, IELTS, because my brother took it and that's how he went to England. But I have never spoken in English, so I needed someone to practice my English with. And so there's this website where you put your language and then you want to practice the language that you want to practice. And so that's where I met a girl, and she living in Iowa, Emily. And so when I started talking to her, and like I was doing calculus at that time, and so she made it like, you are at the level that you can start a university here. And so this is when I realized, because I always thought like, how can I just, a person who just stayed at home, like then suddenly I can compare myself to students in the US who went all their life to school. So I never thought like when I was on my own, I never thought like I was in that level.
And obviously it turns out you were at that level, because you managed to get to Pakistan to take an SAT test because you dreamed of going to college in the US. But there were lots of challenges along the way. How did that come about?
So this one it's covered. I think learning in secret, learning at home, that wasn't the hard part because I was determined. But once I began to get out, the first step was to like, in Afghanistan, we don't have passports so like I had to apply for passport. At that time, my brothers left the country to study abroad. And so my father was working. So really there wasn't a person to take me. And so there were like challenges after challenges. Like in some way I applied for a passport. And then okay, now I have to go to another country because the SAT was not available in Afghanistan. I had to go to Pakistan to take it. And so my uncle was going, and I convinced him to take me there. And eventually the passport also came through, and I took the SAT, and I did well enough to apply to schools in the US.
How did that feel, passing that SAT test?
I felt really, really relieved because it just kind of gave me a lot of confidence. Before I did not know where I am, in a world standard. So I think that gave me a lot of confidence, okay, now I'm prepared for the next step. And so I came back to Afghanistan, and that was the next step, was to apply for a visa to come to the US.
There's a lovely story in the book where you describe flying to Kabul, I think, to get a visa. And as the plane lands, all the women on the flight removed their niqabs and burqas. Did you do that as well?
Yeah, so it was my first time going to Kabul, and I was wearing a niqab. And when as you said, the plane landed, and suddenly all the women were just taking off their niqab or their burqa, and then wearing pants and shirts, and then I didn't go all the way. I just took off just my niqab and let my scarf loosely hang around my head. And I just felt like I was in a different country. It was so surreal.
So you'd gone there to get your visa, but initially you were rejected. So what happened there, and how did you manage to get one?
So I had my acceptance, my college acceptance letter and application form. I paid the fee, and then in a minute, the visa officer told me, "Oh, we can't give you a visa." And I was like, you haven't even looked at my documents. How can you say that to me? And he said, well, we just don't think you're going all the way to school. You're going just to immigrate.
So they couldn't believe that a young girl like you, or a young woman at the time, could have been educated to go to the US to study.
Yeah, it made me so sad, but at the time determined as well. This is when I realized how the world sees Afghans as desperate and just want to go to another country to immigrate. They don't care about education and all of that. So I think for me, it's just like someone pulling the ground from your feet. That's how I felt at that time.
But you did manage to get a visa, and you did manage to make it to the US eventually. Explain how you've ended up where you are, because you now specialize in quantum computing, and that is really quite a jump for a girl who didn't really want to study until the age of 16.
So I was able to get to the US because a New York Times columnist wrote about me and my journey, and that's what allowed me to come to the US. And then I studied physics, and then I went to Arizona State University, and there I became friends with Frank Walchuk, who's a Nobel laureate. And he told me, you have to study quantum mechanics. And he told me, I see my young self in you. And I think that for me was very, very encouraging to, for a person at that level telling me. And because all my life, I was also kind of searching for meaning. And at that time, what felt like quantum computing or quantum physics was you understand level at the fundamental level. You go inside the atom and how the atom works. It's just then you see, okay, that's how the world emerges. That for me felt really enchanting. Quantum physics has this philosophical element too. And then I started doing research in quantum gravity. And then I talked to a professor who was developing quantum algorithm to simulate quantum chemistry at Tufts University. And that's where I am now.
People always say you always remember a good teacher who supported you at some point in your life. In your case, you have educated yourself by and large through online courses, but at the same time, you have had certain individuals, certain professors who, by the sound of it, have given you support at key times.
Yeah, I don't think I would be able to do it without those people that came in my life at the right time and guiding me in the right way. As I mentioned, Frank Walchuk, it's just like the passion that he has for learning. I just thought, like, when I came to the US, I saw students, they were just doing learning because they had to do it for a coursework. There wasn't this passion. And I felt like, oh, maybe there's something wrong with me. Like, I should become. But then I saw this person who was still, like, at that time at age of 65, so much love for learning and just like wants to understand everything. And I think that helped me to sustain my curiosity and then go forward in life.
How much of a culture shock was it moving to the US? How tricky was it making that transition from a very conservative society in Afghanistan to America?
I felt like after age 16, I stopped living in Afghanistan in some sense. I was reading books. I created a world of my own. And I always, from that world, I imagined that I'm going to go to the outside world. And then when I came to the US, that's when I was like, oh, that's where I should have been. Like, I didn't cling to my old way of living.
Understood. There was a passage in the book where you describe being picked up in a car by a woman and told to get in the front seat. And you're hesitant, you write, because you've never seen a woman drive a car before and you'd never been in a front seat before. So there are sort of everyday challenges for you, or maybe not challenges is the right word, but things which other people would consider everyday, which for you are very different and very new.
Yeah, so I would notice it. For example, one is that story. And then there's the other story is that when I was very young, I would go to rivers in Kandahar with my father and brothers, and I loved swimming. But then I never swam. And then I went to Arizona State University, and I went to the swimming pool. And for like a few months, I would go there every day because I just felt like I'm a child again. And then suddenly I can do those things. So of course, there was those things, which wasn't challenging, but it just like you live at a certain age, and then you're a certain point, you have freedom. When you're, in my case, when I was a kid, then you're just suddenly like you have to live differently because you're a woman, you're a grown up woman, so you can't do this. Then you're able to do these things again in the way you want it. So I think it was this kind of, I don't know if it's clear the way I'm saying.
No, it's clear. It is clear. And I presume now you feel like you fit in the US. It hasn't been too difficult to adjust over the years.
No, I mean, I think about things differently. And I think just being like those two people in oneself, that's there. But I think it's more of an intellectual challenge. I don't know. It isn't like it stops me from communicating people or living freely.
Is there anyone you know back there who's been inspired by your actions and as a result are secretly learning online?
I do have cousins, daughters, but I think it's just, I can't just tell them like, oh, I did it, so you have to, like, you can do it too. I think it's every person's story is different, and I got so much lucky along the way. So I think there are a lot of girls that, oh yeah, they want to learn, but I think it's the first challenge is really English, and then there isn't that a lot of structure there. So for me, I don't know, I was just like so crazy to learn that I was able to learn. I'm so obsessed with learning, but I think everyone else kind of need a little bit more structure and also need, an incentive like, okay, once I learn this, what will come after that? Because there's no scholarships for women, and even you get scholarship, it's hard to get a visa. So you can't just tell girls like, oh yeah, you just learn and then everything will take care of itself, because that's not how it is.
Do you feel conflicted at all because you effectively, I think, can't go back? Would you ever consider going back?
No, I never want to go back because at least as long as, the country is in the state it is, because I do have a lot of my beautiful childhood memories in that country. But even I go back there, I'm not going back to the times where that memories are formed. The people are not there. So it's a very strange relationship. In my head, I spent so much time in that country, but yet I'm so distant from it. And I don't see myself in the future going back there.
What are your plans for the future then? Other than becoming a world famous quantum computing scientist?
So I'm definitely, I'm focusing on writing fiction. I'm working on a novel, and it's all in Afghanistan and how this country has gone through so much over decades and how the politics has been shaping people's lives. And then recently I wrote a opinion piece in the New York Times, which does talk about freedom and then talk about, in a sense, like who won in early 2000, and then how that freedom was, in some sense, imprisonment to some other people who were impacted by airstrikes, but then how now the freedom that people feel who supported the Taliban is imprisonment to the people who wants, to their daughters to be educated, the girls that want to be, have a life. And so these are the things that I've been really thinking about. And so like how these dynamics play.
Well, Sola, good luck with that project and all your other plans. Listening to you speak throughout this interview, I have to say that you've certainly put me and probably many others to shame. I grew up with every opportunity to study and learn, and I didn't always do my homework. I certainly wasn't always committed to educating myself, and I am genuinely humbled and inspired by your story. So, Sola Mahfouz, thank you for sharing it with us, and thank you so much for your time. And if you want to learn more about her story, it is fascinating. Pick up the book she wrote, Defiant Dreams, the journey of an Afghan girl who risked everything for an education. Sola, good luck with all your projects.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you.
To those listening, if you have a spare moment, please do check out other episodes of Top Class. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and do join us again soon for another episode of Top Class. All the best.